Hi, and welcome to Chapter 11. In Chapter 11, we're going to start working with events and event handlers. So all of our code up until this point has been kind of static. We've changed some things, we've written some code, but now we're going to start allowing us to make some changes and working with events in different styles. Let's get started. When you see this project, try not to get intimidated to start with. If you've ever played Minesweeper, it's kind of a similar game to that in the fact that it's going to be a grid and you're going to be clicking the different cells to open or close them to expose a puzzle in this case. You're going to be starting to work with JavaScript events. Events are generally something that is run in response to you clicking or loading or moving something. So you can click the mouse, you can move a cursor around, you can use your keyboard buttons, or even just the onload event or on focus event are going to allow you to do different events in JavaScript. We're going to be building a puzzle for our project. And we're going to have a couple of different puzzles that we can do. This is the Japanese puzzle game of Hanji. And it's kind of similar to like Minesweeper. But we're going to be making a project. So we're first going to add in our CSS and our style or our code pages. So first we're going to insert our hanji.css file as a style sheet. And then we're going to add in the two script files. The grids one holds all of the grids for us. So that looks like this. And yes, you can look and see the answers ahead of time, but that's not the point. So they have the puzzles in there. And then this is our Hanji.js file, and this is where all the functions that you're going to be building are going to be. So we've added in those files. It's really important ahead of time for you to take the time to figure out in your code, what are the events that you want? What events do you think you're going to need? In this case, we're going to need events that are going to react to mouse buttons. We're going to need events that respond to actual buttons because we have puzzles across the top. We need to have events that load automatically so that the puzzle gets loaded when we get started. And a couple of other things like the show solution or check to see if I got it right. Each event must be what we called handled. So handling an event means handling the fact that the event occurred and writing some code that's going to happen when you write that event. We are going to now create an event handler. So each event or each element can usually have an on event. On click, on mouse over, on mouse out, on load, on so on and so forth. These different on events are generally, by the way, all lowercase. They're not camel case. So getting them wrong is a problem. You want to make sure you catch them. These are usually all lowercase. So on mouse over is all lowercase as we go across. There are different types of events for different elements. So depending on if you were talking about the window or the document or individual elements, different elements have different events that they can occur. You can click a button, but you can't click a text box or a text field like an H1. You can't click an H1. Actually, it's not entirely true. You probably can. But generally you don't. So there's on click events, there's on mouse overs, but only applies if it's something that the mouse can go over. You can set the value of the on event with the string that would be exactly what the script looks like. So in the example down here, with my element on event, I can put the initialize in a string as though I were calling it as a function. So it's a quote, initialize quote. If you're doing it in the event, in the element itself. If you are writing it in your JavaScript, you do not need the parentheses. So it's really important to keep those two things straight. If it's in JavaScript, just write the name of the function. It knows what functions are. It doesn't need the parentheses. If you're doing it in your HTML, you have to include the parentheses and it has to be in a string. It's not in a string when you assign it in the JavaScript. So keeping those straight is really important. A couple of examples are on this page: on change, on click, on mouse over, on mouse out, on load, so on and so forth. And just a couple of other ones for the browser window. Remember, everything is a little bit different. So the browser window has different options than regular elements do. Just things to keep straight when you're writing your event handler. So the first function we're going to make is our onload event, which is going to be our initialize function. This is going to run when the web page is first loaded. It's going to display the first puzzle and load the event handlers for the buttons. So the buttons actually do something. Right now, they're not doing anything. So we are going to scroll down directly underneath the initial comments before we get to the ones that are already written for us, and we're going to write our function. So we're going to do it in init, open and close parenthesis. It doesn't take any parameters. It's our original function. And we're going to insert our title. So the first thing we're going to do is our document, get element by ID, because we got to go find the right element, and we're going to get the puzzle title. This is going to be filled in by our JavaScript because we can change different puzzles, and when we do, we want to have a different title for each. So for our title, we are going to put in inner HTML, and we're just going to set that equal to the string puzzle1. After that, we're going to insert our code to draw our puzzle. Now, draw puzzle is already written for you, so that is going to help. So we're going to go ahead and do, and we are going to go get our element of our puzzle. So it's just puzzle in our HTML page. Dot inner HTML. And we're going to set that equal to the result of our draw puzzle, parentheses. Which one do we want? We want our puzzle hint, comma, our puzzle rating, and our puzzle itself. Puzzle 1. If we go back over to our grids, you will find that there is this, oops, I had to make sure I got the right one. Puzzle 1 hint, puzzle 1 rating, and puzzle 1. And yeah, those are the ones that came in. I want to make sure that those were the right ones. If you didn't look over at your grids, you might not have recognized this 1 in between puzzle hint, puzzle rating, and puzzle 1. So we're going to start with that one. That's going to be our first project. Now, we have created our initialize code, but we haven't actually loaded it yet. We have to create our event handler for when the project is started. So we're going to tell our window object on load, I want you to do initialize. Now, in this case, it's really important to keep these straight. Yes, initialize is a function that takes parentheses. However, onload knows that it's a function and doesn't need its parentheses, so it's lovely just like init. You don't need to put the parentheses here. In fact, if you did, it would get very confused. So it just wants the name of the function without the parentheses when you assign it as an event handler in this situation. Let's go ahead and save that and see what happens. Look, we got our first puzzle. So again, our draw puzzle code is written for us, and that's at the bottom of this page. As you can see, there's nothing after that. They wrote that code so that it would draw the puzzle and it would add the CSS, and it's lovely, and it takes the hint called triangle and the puzzle and shows our first puzzle. When you handle an event, you are passed an event object. It's an object type, like a date or a string. It is a type of object called an event object. And that event object has certain properties and methods associated with them. I've kind of listed a few of them here. The important one that you need to remember is the target. When an event occurs, there's usually a target that is the thing that caused it to occur. It moused over this button. Therefore, the button is the target. You clicked this button. The button is the target. So you loaded the window is the target. So the target is a really important thing because it's the object that caused the event to occur. Generally, programmers will go ahead and use the variable e to refer to the event just because it's consistent, same way we use I for iteration. And the events are passed into the handler function. Remember, we're calling a function when we handle. So in this case, we have a function, and then whatever our function name is, and then in our parentheses, we have an E or EVT or whatever you want your event object to be. You can then use that variable inside of your code to say, give me the E.target, give me the E.phase or the timestamp or type or whatever that is that you need. Another thing that's really important is the keyword this. So this is in reference to the target from E. It's understood when you are in an event handler. When you use this, it refers to the event or the element that called you. Whatever the object is that called the event, that caused the event, that's going to be this. So you can save yourself a little bit of code so you don't have to do e.target. You can just say this and it knows. It knows that this is the object that caused the event to occur. So in the example down here where we did swap puzzle, and we're going to see this in code in just a second, we are going to pass the parameter e, and that e is going to give us this ID. So I could say e.target.id, or I can just say this.id, and both of them work. So they do exactly the same thing. So let's go see some event objects and things that we can get from our object. So we have a problem right now. These buttons across the top, they're not doing anything. Puzzle 2, puzzle 3, puzzle 1 doesn't change anything. But what we really wanted to do is every time you push the puzzle button, that it changes puzzles to a different puzzle. So we're going to go ahead and work on that. And it's called a on-click event handler. We're going to apply an event handler to each of the buttons to make sure that they can go ahead and work correctly. In our initialize, again, this is a piece of code that needs to be run at the beginning of your page when it is first loaded. So on the onload or our initialize, we are going to add our event handlers for our 3 puzzle buttons. All right, now this is where we kind of have to recognize what we had done for our code over here. When we have these 3 buttons, you notice all 3 buttons here, puzzle 1, 2, and 3, are all of class puzzles. Puzzle 1, 2, and 3, they all have IDs, but they are a class puzzle, which means when I come over here, I can actually use a loop, which is lovely because I like loops. So I'm going to make my puzzle buttons, and that's going to be equal to my document, get elements by class name, elements meaning I'm going to get more than 1. And I'm going to look for the class called puzzles. And this will get me an array of all 3 puzzle buttons. So when puzzle buttons comes back with 3 options, I can go and use that. So I'm going to use my for loop. I'm going to make my I equals 0. I'm going to go until I is less than my puzzle buttons dot length. And I'm going to increment my I. Now I can run through and assign the on-click event to each of my 3 puzzle buttons in this for loop. I don't have to write them all separately. If I had 20 puzzle buttons, 1 for each, I could do it this way, and that way I don't have to worry. So I'm going to say puzzle button I. So essentially I want to get the first puzzle button, and I am going to say on click. So my on click event for that puzzle button. And I'm going to equal that to my swap puzzle function. And you're going to go, where's my swap puzzle function? So now we need to write our swap puzzle function. Below our initialize function, we're going to go ahead and create our swap puzzle function. As we saw up here, that was going to be one of the things that we would have to do. So I'm going to create my swap puzzle function. Swap puzzle. It's going to be very happy with me now because now I actually have a function associated with my on-click event. I have added E as my event parameter to my swap puzzle function because I need to know who is calling me to ask me to swap puzzles. I can get that with my E event. So when I get my E event, it's going to tell me what my target was, and that target is going to tell me which of the 3 buttons. Fortunately, I can use that information to figure out which puzzle I want to switch to because I can look at the ID or the value of that button to find out which puzzle to pick. So in my swap puzzle function, I am going to say puzzle ID. And I'm going to set that equal to E target ID because I want the ID value. Once I get the ID value, I can use that in a switch statement to make everything happy. I'm then going to say my puzzle title is going to be equal to my E target value. Remember when we come back over here, that value capitalized and it looks pretty because we're going to put it in here as our header. Yeah, I'm just going to make that go away so I can stop looking at it. Okay, so I've got my puzzle title and my puzzle ID. Now I'm going to go update my puzzle title. I already have a piece of code that does that, which is right here. So I'm actually going to copy and paste that and just replace puzzle 1 with whatever the title was that I came up with. Generally, I avoid copying and pasting unless I know it's the same piece of code. I might even write a function that says set the puzzle title that takes a parameter. But for this purposes, that's fine. Okay, now we have our title set when we click it. We can even test this. See how it changes? Doesn't change the puzzle yet. We haven't fixed that part. But it changed the title based on which one we clicked. So let's go change the actual puzzle. We're going to use a switch statement with our puzzle ID. Switch statements are great when you have multiple options like this. Inside of our switch statement, we're going to have multiple cases. We're going to have one called puzzle 1. And then we'll have a puzzle 2 and a puzzle 3. And we'll go ahead and write the code. Okay, after puzzle 1, in this one, I want to do my document get element by ID, go find my puzzle. This is, again, very similar to the code that we just had up there in our initialize. And we are going to set the inner HTML equal to draw puzzle, and we're going to pass it our puzzle hint, puzzle rating, and puzzle for puzzle 1. Puzzle hint 1, puzzle 1 rating, and puzzle 1. Because that's our first one. Don't forget your break. If you forget your break, what'll happen is your code will run down to the second one and run that as well. You need to break it to get you out of the switch statement. So I'm going to copy that, paste it down there, and paste it down there one more time. Okay, let's just make sure that's tabbed in correctly. Now, this one is going to be puzzle 2. Go get the puzzle, and I'm going to change this to my puzzle 2 hint, my puzzle 2 rating, and my puzzle 2. Then I'm going to do the same thing for my puzzle 3. Puzzle 3, puzzle 3, and puzzle 3. I'm going to save that. Changes the puzzle. See how we can go back and forth? Because it's going to change, and you'll notice that it changed also the hint. This one says elementary, this one says moderate. Unfortunately, all of the puzzles are solved right now because we haven't actually written the code to do the game. That's part of the project. You can find the properties and attributes of an object in your JavaScript, which is great. As you can see with our target ID or whatever, you can get those properties or attributes. Some of them are read-only, some are writable. We will see more about this as we move along. Some of them are a little bit different than you would expect. Class name is what we use for class. So we don't say object.class, we say object.className. That's because class means something else, and we don't want to get confused with that. In this case, the class name is the CSS class, as opposed to classes, which we'll talk about later. You can reference the styles by using the object, whatever the object is, whether you went and got the object, whether you used the get element by ID or whatever to get your object. You can then click dot style and then dot whichever property went along with that. So if you wanted to do object.background color, you would do object.style.background color. Think about how you want to format, if you want to use classes or if you want to use inline styles, because you can do the inline styles with your JavaScript. But I really recommend you stick with your CSS just because it's going to keep things consistent. You can also build object collections, and you can create collections or arrays of objects by using the query selector all. This is going to be really useful in this project because we're going to want to get all of the cells that exist inside of our puzzle so that we can start modifying them. So we're going to use our query selector all in that case to reference all the objects that are in the collection and then apply changes to the property of all elements by using a for loop. So we can then use a loop to loop through that array, and we don't have to do them all individually. Can you imagine if there were, 100 different cells and we needed to modify them all? We can do that with for loop by just using our query selector to get all of them that have the same class or the same element with the same class, and then changing the element properties, styles, whichever we need to do in a loop thereafter. We're next going to build our setup puzzle function. So setting up a new puzzle has to add the event handlers for every cell in our puzzle. We need to do something different every time we click on it. So we need to set up our event handlers. I'm actually going to put this in between directly below the swap puzzle. So put it down here. And we are going to build our setup puzzle. We are going to use a global variable. Yes, I'm usually not a big fan of global variables. In this case, we're going to go ahead and use a global variable for puzzle cells because we're going to use it so often rather than passing it back and forth as parameters. So we're going to go ahead and create a variable called puzzle cells. And we're using it in a lot of different places in this project. So it's global now. It can be used in any function. And I'm going to make my new function. Function setup puzzle. Oops, spelled wrong. CLE. Inside my setup puzzle, I'm going to do two different things. I'm going to match all of the data cells in the puzzle to go get them all. So I'm going to be using a query selector for that. And then I'm going to go through each of the puzzle cells and set their background color so that they all get hidden to begin with. So the first thing I need to do is get all of the data cells. So my puzzle cells, I'm going to set equal to document query selector all. And in this case, I need to pick the all because I want it to be all of the puzzle cells. And I'm going to use my table, hashtag, handgrid, TD. So this is going to be my cells inside of my project. It's not really important, but we could always come down here to recognize where that's coming from. So we're going to be creating a table called Hangy, and then anytime we have cells, we're going to be setting, so the Hangy grid, and then, yeah, I somehow missed the period. Oh no, the space, missed the space between those. So we needed, and that's always good. So I was going to say that didn't make any sense. There we go. That looks much more like a selector. So we're going to find the Hangy grid table, and then we're going to go find any TDs inside of it. This will give me the list of all of the cells, whether it's the small puzzle or the large puzzle, it'll get me all of them. Then I'm going to do my for loop. Variable I equals 0 because we like our iterator. We are going to go until we get to the end of the puzzle cells. Length, sorry, I is less than. Puzzle length and I plus plus. It's a pretty standard thing for for loops. You'll get really comfortable with it. And then I'm going to set my background color. So puzzle cells, I, this is going to get me the actual element of each cell individually as way I run through my loop. I'm going to say set the style of each one and then the background color. So the background color of, I don't know why that changed the way it did, sorry. Puzzle cells I, style, background color. So this is the background color, and I'm going to set it to a color. In this case, it's a string. So I'm going to do an RGB. I'm going to do 233, 207, 29 in my RGB. Close and semicolon to finish it. When I save this, nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? Because I haven't called setup puzzle yet. You have to go call setup puzzle from inside of your initialize function. So our initialize, we had our event handlers. Let's do, oops, not there. That's inside of our for loop. Setup puzzle. So we'll call it there. See how they all changed? They're all yellow now. Problem. We changed to a different one and it doesn't fit because we have to call setup puzzle after building and we swapped puzzles. So I have to run this code as well down here in my swap puzzle code to make sure it gets run every time that I click a button. So this is how it starts. Click puzzle 2, click puzzle 3, go back to puzzle 1, and it sets them all up correctly. So I hope that started you okay. You're not intimidated. It's time to get started on session 2, where we'll talk about some more things with our styles and our events.